Brian, when we started, and Brian and I were both original with the Concord Coalition, and we both worked on the Tsongas campaign.
Unbelievable.
We talked about we talked about climate issues because Paul Tsongas talked about climate issues. But when we started working with the Concord Coalition, we thought of it as an environmental issue, as a serious threat to the planet, still is, but we didn't think of it as a budget and an economic issue.
Correct.
That really does seem to be changing. I mean, I think increasingly you see reports from the United States government and international agencies raising the alarm about the economic and budgetary effects of climate change. And I certainly notice when we do field events around the country, this is certainly something that resonates with a younger audience.
Yeah.
I start talking about fiscal sustainability, and they want to know about environmental sustainability. And I think there's something to be said for both. So I'm glad you're here today because you started out in the fiscal sustainability arena with Concord, but you're now in your job with Smart Power, you're working on the environmental sustainability. Do you see some synergies between the two?
Oh, a ton. And I mean, I would even, let me just, real quick, I'll say there is a climate and economic challenge and a climate and economic opportunity. So we should keep that in mind, and let me talk about that a little bit. But first, let me just pull it back a little bit too, which is when we started Concord, we knew it was going to be a long slog. We knew this was a very big challenge. And the real challenge was actually getting it to resonate with the American people. How do you actually get individual homeowners, how do you get individual people to actually think and care about the federal budget deficit? And we have been successful in doing that. Concord's been very successful in doing that, actually personalizing this issue. That is the same challenge we have with climate change, by the way, on that very same challenge, because these are huge issues and scary issues, quite frankly. And you have people literally throw up their hands and say, what can I do about either the deficit or climate? And our approach at Smart Power has been actually the same approach that we had with Concord, which is you have to personalize it, and you have to give people solutions that they themselves can actually do. And that becomes a real exciting piece of this thing. So solutions that each individual can take on climate is really important so that we can build up to the giant legislation that has to happen or has happened, and kind of the countrywide agreements that have to happen or are trying to happen. But when we all have buy-in, the same we talked about with Concord, when people have buy-in about the federal budget deficit for themselves, then we can actually make changes on a federal level. So kind of the recipe is still the same. And then if you pull it, kind of go forward, you realize like, yeah, so there are huge economic implications to climate, and they are happening today. Every time there's a hurricane that we don't anticipate, and we don't anticipate hurricanes, we have to pay for it. There are huge implications when everything from there's just a storm that shuts down, say, transportation or drags people to not go to work. There are economic implications to that we have to start accounting for. Then if you look at the opportunity side of this thing, we can actually see that the United States' focus on climate and sustainability really has the opportunity, gives the opportunity for all of us to actually be the engine that powers the economy. And that economy really can turn things around. And we've always known this, but you talk about, when we create our own energy here at home, as opposed to buying it from another country, that's a huge opportunity for the United States and for our economy. When you look at the IRA, the infrastructure bill, the jobs being put into place today and actually over the next 5 years is going to be unbelievable, not just for the men and women working on these jobs, but actually the solutions to climate change. And what will come from that will be private sector investments that some of us can't even imagine at this point. When we started Concord Coalition 20 years ago,
30.
I'm sorry. When I started Smart Power 20 years ago. Sorry. I started Smart Power 20 years ago. The concept of an electric car was just a concept. It was almost a joke. And today, I'm going to pick up my Tesla this afternoon. So today, it's just commonplace. When we started Smart Power, the concept of hybrid cars hadn't even been in place. When we started Smart Power, we didn't have smartphones. The ability for us to actually change how we live, work, play, and pray is unbelievable, and we can do it sustainably. So, and I would just kind of wrap up by also saying, one of the things that we realized at Concord Coalition, and we also know at Smart Bar, is that this is done through changing people's perception and changing their behavior. And that really has to happen. And it's a huge process. When you change people's behavior, when you get a 10-year-old to turn off a light, they don't do it just once. They do it for their entire lifetime. And then she raises a family that turns off lights. Like, that's what happens. And that's what Concord Coalition has been thinking about for 30 years, which is how do we get all of us to change our behavior so that Congress and the government actually spends what it makes. It's a unique concept. But how do we actually get people to think that that's the way it's supposed to be and use that behavior so that we then implement that at the ballot box?